What is going on, everybody? This is Wrong Reel, episode 607. It's a podcast for hardcore cinephiles where we tackle everything from Jean-Luc Godard to Jean-Luc Picard. And today it is my honor and my privilege to talk to Howard Berger and Marshall Julius, the two authors behind the upcoming book, Masters of Makeup Effects, A Century of Practical Magic. Marshall Julius is a film critic, a blogger, broadcaster, and author, and the individual who was kind enough to reach out to me and offer me this interview. And Howard Berger is a special effects makeup artist who for decades has been working on some of my all-time favorite films, helping filmmakers bring to life some of the best movies and shows that I've ever seen, from working with directors like Quentin Tarantino to winning an Oscar for his work on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, to more recently creating the aliens for what might be my favorite ongoing show, The Orville. Howard has amassed a massive body of work. Go to his IMDb profile and your jaw will hit the floor. So I could not be more fired up to talk to both of you today about this absolutely fantastic new book. And with all that out of the way, Howard Berger, Marshall Julius, welcome to Wrong Reel.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us. God, doesn't Howard sound so much more impressive?
Yeah, what's up? What you got?
I think I'm just going to sit here quietly, and you can talk to Howard. Really, I shouldn't even be here.
Well, along those lines, we'll start with Marshall to bring you up to the level of Howard. There's an impossible amount of topics I want to cover, but let's just talk with the obvious. What is this book that you and Howard have assembled? How did it come to be? How did the two of you first meet? Marshall, I want to hear all about it.
Well, we first met when Howard was doing publicity for the first Chronicles of Narnia movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It had already come out and been a huge hit. Howard had already won the Best Makeup Effects Oscar, and rightfully so, for his amazing work on it. And it was coming out on DVD, and he came over to London to promote it. And I was sent over by my newspaper. I was working for the Sunday Express, and I interviewed him, and he made me up as Mr. Tumnus. I was like a wonderful fawn, he said, and I believed him better than any of the other people who turned up that day. And he made the terrible mistake of giving me his email address, which meant for the next 10 years, I would just continually hassle him. And after a few years, because I know Howard's a huge movie fan and a huge kind of movie merch and books, and we thought that it might be fun to kind of write a book together someday. You know, we kind of came to that decision. But then I spent 10 years saying to Howard, so have you got the time for us to write the book? So have you got the time for us to write the book? And he was like busy having this amazing career. It's like, you know, when somebody says to you, oh, well, you know, I'd like to, but I'm turning Anthony Hopkins into Alfred Hitchcock, or, you know, I'd like to, but I've got to work with, you know, international superstar Mark Wahlberg. And it's like, I go, oh, well, okay, you know, I got to go and do my laundry today. And, you know, so it's like, what can I do? It's like, I'd say, okay, that's fine. And then the best thing happened to my career ever, the pandemic. And it was like, I knew it. I knew that he'd be home. And so I literally emailed him. I said, let's have a chat. And, not that I want to make light of the pandemic, of course, it was a terrible tragedy. But for me, it was like I wrote to Howard, we spoke, and in that single conversation, right, Howard, we agreed that we were going to do it, that the time had come, that, you know, after 10 years, it was like, it was just time to do it. And we started then and there. We literally started immediately. And we spent 2 years writing it. Every day we spoke and we worked on it, and every single detail, from who we spoke to the style of the book, to editing every word and every picture and the design and everything. And, you know, it's just become this incredible kind of labor of love, this kind of passion project. I know that Howard, he's like wanting it's you know, it's important to him. It's important to me. It's the most exciting and fun project that I've ever been involved with.
Yeah, the love comes off the book in waves. And so we'll promote this information again at the end of the episode, but just right out of the gate, when will the book be available for people if they wish to pre-order it? How can people kind of get this book on their radar?
Howard, do you want to get this one? Do you want to?
You go ahead.
Well, it's coming out mid-September in the UK and the US, and pretty much anywhere where you've got an Amazon, you can get it. There are going to be foreign language versions, but for the actual launch, it's going to be mid-September. If you're lucky enough to be in or close to Los Angeles, we're doing a variety of launch events, including a mega signing at Dark Delicacies, which is a wonderful bookshop and merch store, kind of specializing in horror and crime. And there's going to be Howard and I and like over 20 of our contributors. So for the price of the book, you can come and you can get your book signed by like 25 people. It's crazy. We're also doing an event at the Academy Museum, which I'm very excited about. So far, it looks like Howard's partner, Greg Nicotero, is going to be there at KMB. We've got Tom Savini and Bruce Campbell, Doug Jones. It's going to be an amazing event. And we have some other things lined up as well. So you can follow our social and find out about all of that. But mid-September is when it's actually going to be available. And you can pre-order it now on Amazon, or, it's doing very well, we're told. It's very exciting that people have shown so much interest in it, and there's so much buzz around it. It's just the most exciting thing I've ever been, involved
It's
in.
chocolate for the eyes. There's something about the format where we've all read dry kind of biographical texts in the past, but what I love about this is just incredible imagery and incredible quotes and analysis and commentary that it just leaps off the page. And so how did the two of you land on this approach where it would be more or less testimonials from actors and craftspeople and filmmakers talking about their reactions to certain performers in their makeup or whatever the craft might be? And at what point, how did you basically kind of wrangle these hundreds of people to make all these contributions to the book? Because it's just a cornucopia of love and affection for film going all the way back to the silent era.
Well, I mean,
that was really Howard's idea. So it was Howard's idea in the first place. So you should tell them about it.
Well, I wanted to write I had a book when I was a kid called Making a Monster by Al Taylor and Sue Roy, and it's a great book. And that book really kind of inspired me to do this. I always wanted to write a book about makeup effects. I didn't want to write a book about myself because I know all about myself. But I wanted to make it about adventure, because I love adventure. And I think adventure in movies is really fun. I always love behind the scenes photos and things like that. And so when Marshall and I started talking about a book, I said, well, I have an idea. I wanted to kind of do it in this format. And we talked to as many people in the industry, be it makeup artists, be it film editors, be it directors, be it actors, be it, costume designers, whatever, that we can get their stories and their photos that we've never seen before. And I think that's really, really interesting. And Marshall started plotting it out and came up with a lot of different scenarios for the book and chapters and so forth. And again, we had an idea, and then since everybody was not working due to the pandemic, I reached out to 70 plus people. Everybody said yes. And we spent the next actually, we started interviewing in April and we wrapped it up in August of 2020. We gave ourselves a time frame, or else we'd still be interviewing people, because there's a lot of people that we didn't get to interview that I wish we had. But that will be hopefully for volume number 2 if everything goes as anticipated.
It's an inexhaustible topic. Yeah, it
is. So, but it was really, really great, and I loved it. And because everyone we talked to, my criteria was that I wanted them to be, they needed to be friends. Like I wanted, and they inspired me, or both, or any of that. And it was great. I mean, like I talked to some of my best friends in the world, like Greg Nicotero and Jamie Kellman and Mike McCracken and a bunch of people. And then there were people that I know, that I'm not best friends with or what have you, but that was really great. Somebody like Carl Fullerton, who did Silence of the Lambs and a bunch of other movies, really amazing makeup artists, used to work with Dick Smith. And so it was really fun to have like a 2-hour conversation with everybody and I learned a lot about my friends that I never knew about, and really, really fun stuff. And we just made it very casual. It's just, as I just said, listen, it's like out having dinner and let's just talk about stuff. And that's what we did. And we worked up questions that were specific to the person and to the chapters we were planning. And then, from one question from one answer rather comes like 3 more new questions, and it just keeps building and building and building. And we talked to people all over the world. That was the thing. It wasn't like, oh, we're just going to do LA or New York or whatever. We talked to people in Spain and quite a handful of guys in the UK, like Mark Coulier and Nick Dudman and Barry Gower, and really all over the place, Sweden. So we really cast a very, very wide net. And the reason we talked to also directors and actors and editors was because it was great to get their point of view of what we do for a living and hear their stories, because they're from a different angle. We talked to Ben Foster for quite a while, and Ben loves makeup, and he really it's a collaboration and a partnership when he works with his makeup artist so that he can help develop the character the two of them do. And it's a very, very interesting perspective. We're talking to James McAvoy the very first time we did the Mr. Tumnus makeup. And, he had never been in makeup like that before and what his experiences were, So it's really...
Or his experiences with Dick Smith's work on The Exorcist. That anecdote in the book is absolutely hysterical. He wakes up in the night and he's screaming at Satan in his bed,
right,
convinced he's about to be attacked. And he's
it's cool. But it's fun stuff like that. And it's all fun stories. It's all about, there's no like crap slinging in the book. It's not like, and then we this and that. That's not what we were after. It's not a trash talk book. It's about positivity and lifting up people in our industry and artists, lifting up artists and filmmakers. And really, it's the book I always wanted to read. Really, that's, what you want to do. And then once we interviewed everybody, Marshall had the arduous task of having to go through all the interviews and transcribe everything. And I mean, there was millions of words that he had to go through.
It was like 150 hours worth of interviews.
Yeah. And then I went ahead and I started collecting photos from everyone. And we ended up collecting 4,000 photos. And I think we used about 1,000 photos. The editor kept saying, like, we need to cut photos. And I'm like, no, just this one. Oh, no, just this one. Because there were so many great photos. And I'd say 95% are ones that you've never seen before because they're personal, and I pulled a lot out of my archives because I always have a camera around my neck and for the last 40 years, and I'm always shooting. And I just went into the archives and I pulled tons of great stuff. And Matt Winston, who's Stan Winston's son, pulled a ton of great things of Stan when he was really young, and some stuff I'd never ever seen before, which was really wonderful. But yeah, no, I mean, it really was a blast. And I appreciate you saying about the aesthetics of the book, because Marshall and I really, really had our hands deep in it. It's one thing I really learned was when somebody says, I think I'm going to write a book. I'm like, yeah, go have at it. It's really, really hard. Let me tell you, this was not an easy task. And we had a really good editor, our friend Ross, who's a great guy, and then Russell, who was the graphic designer on the show for Welbeck in London, which is our publisher. But I mean, we know the stuff, and we really, really had to go through and like constantly shift things around and re-edit. And Marshall and I, every time we got pages, there was always editing from us. It's like, no, this needs to go here. Let's flip this. I want to use this photo. Marshall, what do you think of this? Marshall, rewrite this.
We were so lucky that they were actually that patient with us and so receptive, because they let us make so many changes and change things. And we would say, we want to use this picture, that picture. Can we flip that round? Can that be smaller? Can we do this? Can we do that? And they just indulged us to the point but everything was for the good of the book, and they appreciated that. And it was nice to be trusted to know what we were talking about and to follow our lead. And I have to say, this book I've read a lot of movie books, I can't count how many movie books I've read over the years. And this feels completely unique to me. And it's unique because of Howard, because, I, as a journalist, I mean, you'll understand this when you reach out to people. 60%, 70, 80% of the time, maybe you don't even hear back from the people who you ask for interviews with. You know, it's not easy. And to fill up a book with this, if I was doing this by myself, I would have probably had to spend 2 years just chasing people and going through their people. And, you know, it would have been really, really difficult. Whereas Howard just sent an email and it's like, okay, right, we're speaking to, you know, Rebecca. Okay. You know, we're speaking to Matt Winston. Okay. We're speaking to Norman Cabrera, just all these like amazing people. And on top of that, when we started talking, it was like, you know, Howard's their friend, you know, there's trust there. And they were so happy to chat. And so they told us stories that I am convinced they would never have told, you know, anybody else. I think that there's stuff that they wouldn't have necessarily trusted with anyone else. And we, you know, we really respected that trust. Whenever we pulled our favorite stories from everybody, and we sent everything once it was transcribed and polished to everybody that we interviewed, and we said, are you happy for us to use these stories? So, you know, we did it, and we covered, we made sure we didn't want anybody to be cross with us. We didn't want anybody saying, no, that's not quite right. And it did two things. It meant that they could fact check everything and we could get everything just exactly right. And also that if they weren't happy with something, or maybe they said a bit more than they should, or actually most people were just happy to go with it. I mean, you know, you mentioned that James McAvoy story. I thought there's no way he's going to let us use that in the book because he sounds like a lunatic. But it
makes him sound like a real film fan. That's how film lovers talk to each other.
And you know, like we're all, you know, we've kind of been there, maybe not like that, but we've been there, and it's like I was, you know, he was like happy with like, yeah, go for it, do it. Everybody was so happy to help and so excited to be a part of it. And then all the pictures, you know, we were every day people were sending us reams of pictures that I'd never seen before, behind the scenes pictures, really sort of you know, kind of just real. And like, you know, snaps, and you know, we've got stories behind so many amazing makeups. And even if you don't necessarily know the artist who created them, and you will after reading the book, you'll recognize everything they're talking about, you know. So I think that this couldn't have happened without Howard's sort of access, and without the incredible goodwill that he's fostered over the years.
Well, also just the unbridled love for the craft, like I said, comes off in waves from so many of the contributors, in particular the forward by Guillermo del Toro, a filmmaker I really admire. And I love how he's got so many great shout outs to artists like Dick Smith in there. But what I found most moving was the way he describes this obsessive compulsive drive that certain fans have, who he describes as monster kids. So I guess the question for both of you is, when does somebody officially become a monster kid? But more importantly, when does somebody like the 12-year-old Howard realize, oh, this is going to become a lifelong vocation? Because I went down this rabbit hole last night of videos and found your Stan Winston School video where you describe how for 6 years you slowly but surely had to earn your way into the Stan Winston studio by showing him your grades. And then, as promised, age 18, the job was there. So at what point did the two of you know you are monster kids?
Well, I think for me, it was, you know, I don't know. There was just a feeling I had, you know, every time I saw a monster, I just thought it was so wondrous and magnificent, you know, and my dad was a massive cinephile. And so I was raised on films from day one, and my favorite movies were the monster movies, you know. But I think what really hit hard was this sounds crazy, I was in nursery school. And I went to a friend's house, and he happened to have all these monster models, which were the Aurora monster models. And I remember looking at them, and I'm like, what are those? And they were really spectacular. And I'm teeny tiny, so those things looked like they were massive to me. And he told me what they were, and I ran home, and I told my parents we had to go to Sears, and I have to buy these models. And, you know, they were like $1.49, you know, and so all they had were, not all, it was the King Kong, but there were stacks and stacks. So my dad bought me one of those, and I'm holding it in my hand once we built it. And I don't know, at that point I was like, oh my gosh, this could be like a tangible thing. Like I'm holding a monster and it's really fantastic. And at that point, that was it. And then I discovered Famous Monsters in Filmland, Forey Ackerman's magazine. And it just grew and grew and grew. And all I did is draw monsters. I have tons of monsters all over my homework and lunch bags and everywhere, anywhere I could draw a monster. And then my mom was an artist, and then she did a lot of monster drawings. Like she did a full size Creature from the Black Lagoon on butcher paper that hung on my door. So I would look at that every night before I went to bed. And my parents were very supportive, and they fed my bizarreness for monsters. Or I would wear a Dracula cape all the time, or think I was Godzilla or King Kong, stomping around the house, terrorizing my three sisters. And then I just started playing around with makeup, and there weren't any books or magazines or anything like that. It was just like you just kind of like tried to figure some stuff out. Like, with the Famous Monsters, it'd be articles once in a while on like John Chambers, who did Planet of the Apes, and I would take a magnifying glass and look at those photos and try to figure out what was on the table and what was on he was working on, and try to pull from there. And I remember actually that I had sculpted, everybody does a Planet of the Apes makeup. So the first thing I did was I sculpted on a half face. I did my own life cast, like just a 3/4 life cast. I don't know how the hell I did it and got it off and all that, but I worked on this little teeny face that I had. And so I sculpted an Incredible Hulk mask and figured that out. And then I did a Planet of the Apes makeup. And I remember seeing photos of John Chambers and Tom Berman pouring foam rubber into the negative and then squishing in the positive. But I knew nothing about foam rubber. So I just took my latex, slipped latex, like mask making latex, glug, 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 filled it up and pressed my positive in. Well, it took like about 3 months for that to dry. And I just kept waiting and waiting and waiting, finally pulled it out. I had a solid latex Planet of the Apes makeup, but of course all I had to glue was this stuff called spirit gum, which is like what we used to use. Now we don't, and it just would not stay because it was so heavy. It just kept falling off my face. But I was like, something's not there, I'm missing a part here. So anyhow, through years figured it out, and that it was foam rubber that he was using and not slip latex, a big giant piece of rubber there. But it just kept developing and developing, and my sisters Heidi, Heather, and Holly were all subjects, and victims. So they all got made up, dragged into my room.
And so, like, as a child, a lot of your meals tasted like foam latex as well.
Yeah,
I remember Ray Harryhausen's family talking about that as well.
Once I learned about foam rubber, I used my mom's oven. So every time I would bake stuff, I'd have like ultracal molds, and but I had to make all the molds small enough to fit into the oven. So I always had to take that into consideration. And yes, the food, everything tastes like foam rubber. So, but that was okay with me. I didn't care. And, but that's how you start, and my parents at one point ripped out the carpeting in my bedroom because I had destroyed it with paint and clay and latex. And I just had like a slab. It was just a concrete slab. And that way I could like hose out my room. And my parents were like, we're going to take you've destroyed this side of the house. And I'm like, tear it up. I don't care. I just need a bed and a sculpting table. And, but again, it goes back to having really supportive parents who tolerated it. And I think at a certain point I was doing stuff and they just went, I think that he's serious about this. Howard's serious about this. And I don't think this is just like a flight of fancy. I think this is going to be something he's going to follow. And I became obsessed. So, I consider myself a monster kid. And I think there are monster kids that aren't, might not be creative in terms of making stuff. That doesn't mean you have to make stuff, and sculpt, and you can just love it, and be a monster. I have quite a number of friends who I consider monster kids that aren't in the artistic world, but they have monsters on the brain and horror films on the brain and movies on the brain. And really, I think being a monster kid is also being a cinephile. Like it's not just that you like, I only like these movies. You love everything about film, and I think that's really important. And I think that helps you grow as an artist and understand things. If you just like one specific genre, it would be stifling, I feel. But it's because I know Marshall is this way too. We both love movies, like watch everything. Like I watched that movie Brian and Charles last night, which is a little indie film about a guy that makes a robot, you know, and it's goofy and it's cute, but it's like, you know, I could have watched Jurassic Park, the new Jurassic Park movie, but I said, oh, I want to watch this one today. So, but yeah, it's the love of movies and the love of monsters, and that's what drives us, and still does. I think about monsters all the time. It's nonstop.
Marshall, any feeling about what drives people to become monster kids?
Well, like Howard said, you don't have to necessarily go into the film business, and maybe that would have been something I would have enjoyed. But I always consider myself just a huge fan of these things, which is why perhaps a lot of people kind of follow me on my social and find it sort of relatable, because since I was really small, I just always got excited about this stuff. And when I was very young and discovered Ray Harryhausen movies, you know, way before Star Wars, when I was 4 or 5 and they were on TV, I was just completely transfixed by it all, and I had no idea that it wasn't real. You know, as far as I was concerned, it was all like, they were like documentaries as far as I was concerned. Completely. You know, people now say, oh, well, you know, stop motion is wonderful. It's so, you know, it's a wonderful old style of filmmaking and we love it. You know, maybe it's not as realistic as, you know, and then they'll, you know, explain, you know, talk about more modern things, but it's like, believe me, you know, in the early 70s, if you saw a Ray Harryhausen film, you weren't going, oh, you know, okay, so they move in a little jerky way, or, you know, that doesn't look realistic. It's like, you're like, oh my God, it's a Cyclops, or,
Yeah.
you know,
First
oh my
VHS
God, it's a
tape I ever
giant
saw was
crab.
Eye of the
Like,
Tiger, or Sinbad in the Eye of the Tiger. And so once again, it was totally like, again, it was real. The myths were real.
Exactly. I was just instantly out my head about all of that stuff. And like Howard, I had very supportive parents. My dad worked a lot. My mum was very devoted to me, and a huge film fan herself, and would show me everything. And she was interested in all sorts of genres. You know, she loved musicals, she loved comedies, and but you know, as I was getting into monster movies and stuff, every weekend she would take me to the latest Doug McClure movie, or you know, it was just, she was happy to sort of feed that, and it was something that we had together. And so, you know, I just grew up being completely in love with all of that stuff. And like Howard said, it wasn't just monsters, but obviously the fantasy and the sci-fi of it, it was completely irresistible. And then when Star Wars came out, and I was like, just turned 9, that was it. That was like, okay, I think I'm gonna just love this film for my whole life, and that is going to be my career, which is pretty much what I managed to stick to, honestly. You know, when I was 18, I got a job for a magazine, What's On in London, and they hired me as a classical music editor, and pretty soon they let me just write about films, which was very sensible of them. And I used that as an opportunity to chase all my heroes and meet all the people that I admired. And it was like, it was an incredibly privileged position to be able to, like Ray Harryhausen lived in London. And a few times I was able to go and interview him and you know, spend time at his house and just be completely agog by the wonder of it all. So I came,
especially with a small crew. He was almost like a one-man band in a lot of ways.
He absolutely was a one-man band. You know, here's a guy who his mum used to make the costumes. His dad would machine the armatures. And that was, and he did everything else. When he got a bit older, he did have some people, Jim Danforth and so on, people helping him. But, you know, for the most part, it was just him in a workroom. You know, I mean, it sounds like a crazy man, you know, like people sitting in their shed, tinkering away on little projects. Only he would come out after 4 months and he'd be like, well, here, I've created this scene that is like one of the classic scenes in all of cinema, the Hydra scene, the Children of the Hydra's Teeth from Jason the Argonauts. And, you know, he just did that all himself. I mean, it's just absolutely staggering. And I actually thought that he was the only person that did that sort of stuff, that he was the only person who would work completely alone, until we met Christopher Tucker, who is this English mad wizard who did the makeup effects for the Elephant Man. And if you got to that story in the book, here was a guy who said, okay, I'll do it, but you can't call me, you can't come and see I'm not going to show you any sketches. And, here's a guy who on the first day of filming with that makeup, that was the first time anyone, David Lynch, anyone saw that makeup. And so that to me is just, wild and crazy. And certainly Howard has told me that no one could get away with that.
Yeah, you're betting your movie on.
Can you imagine George
the
Lucas?
Designs of a mad artist.
Sorry, I'm going to design the new, I'm going to design the big new featured alien, but you can't see it. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I'm just going to turn up the first day and you're going to film with it. And if you don't like it, well, it's just tough. But yeah, I've just been in love with this stuff all my life. And to be able to go on this sort of journey with Howard has just been like so much fun for me, to be privy to all those conversations and to meet all those amazing people and to talk about their careers and to see that they are, you speak to a lot of filmmakers often, a lot of directors, a lot of actors, and they've done a lot of these interviews before, and there's a certain sort of separation, like they keep you a little bit at arm's length, and that's fair enough. But when you speak to monster kids, when you speak to these makeup people, they are just so in love with it all, and they are just fans. They are just huge fans. And it's like the one thing that nerds connect across generations, across jobs, professions. It's just if you're a James Bond fan, or if you're a Ray Harryhausen fan, or you grew up loving the gore effects of Tom Savini, it's like you're best mates instantly. And that's the vibe I got from all those guys. They're just such a fantastic crowd, and I feel like we got the best interviews from them, and they gave us their best. We got stuff that every interview we got, there was like, that was amazing, I can't wait to share that with people. And we shared the very best of everything in the book. I know
there were two in there that really jumped out at me, and they go back to the film that brought the two of you together. But I love the anecdotes about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. First and foremost, how Howard would bring in his kids who were rabid fans of the books to get their opinions of the creatures as they were being created, because there's nothing more raw and immediate. Like they're not going to kind of have industry concerns when they look at the creature. It's just like, does it match what I see in my imagination? But more importantly, there's a great conversation in there with Mick Garris, where Howard and Mick are discussing how in the 90s, there was a rivalry between practical and digital, but that eventually became a marriage and a collaboration. So Howard, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the sometimes fractious relationship and eventually the harmonious relationship between practical and digital, and how they came together for the creatures on that film, but also just what it's like seeing the pure, unbridled, immediate first reaction in the eyes of your children as these creatures are being, brought to life.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. Narnia was the very first film that I worked on that I really had a huge collaboration with the VFX department, and it was Dean Wright and Bill Westenhofer and Scott Farrar from ILM. But what was cool is at the same time, Greg Nicotero was on Sin City, and that was a huge amount of digital partnership, so he was doing that and relaying his experiences, and I was on Narnia relaying mine, and it was a great collaboration, because prior to that, when Jurassic Park came out, that's when everything kind of really changed, and we sat in the theater and just thought that was the end of us. We were extinct, and they'll do everything digital, but they didn't, because obviously there's a lot of practical stuff in the Jurassic Park that Stan Winston Studios did. And then, producers and studios were thinking like, oh, well, we have to always do state of the art, so it all has to be digital, but not all of it was very good. There's some really, really bad stuff during that period. And it's because they didn't have the time and money and understanding, and didn't have Phil Tippett to help drive the actual character animation.
Shout out to Mad God. It's incredible.
Yeah, crazy Mad God, and which we all went to see. And So, there was a competition, and it was a matter of like, we would design things and build them and shoot them. And then we had situations where, and this isn't on Narnia, this is on other stuff, the VFX department would come in and change the design in post, and then all our stuff got cut because it didn't match, but it could have matched if they had followed the design. So what we started to do is, we would take on the design front and hand over our assets to VFX so everything matches, and we still do that today, and it works out great. And now that VFX is in the same boat as all of us, which is no time and no money, they need to have the same resources, and we discuss on films, during pre-production, what can we do to help you, what can you do to help us, how can we make this a better effect, for the director, how can we make this a better sequence. So it is a great partnership, and on Narnia it was wonderful because I worked so closely with visual effects and how we were going to do things and how we were going to do the blend. And to me, like, I kept getting calls from Andrew Adamson, who was the director, and he's like, do you want to come to the editing room and see some of the movie? And I'm like, I don't. I want to wait till it's all done. I just want to sit in the theater and see it for the first time as it should be seen, not like, James Still in green screen leggings and dots on his waist and things like that. So on top of all the other stuff. So there was a first screening at the Directors Guild of America, and I took my kids to see it, and we sat in the theater, and the first time you see Mr. Tumnus, I just took a big gasp, very loud, I guess. And my daughter Kelsey was like, "Dad, quiet," and I was like, oh my goodness, that's it. That's what I've been working on for 2 years, and on top of all the other characters we did, and having my kids involved in some way was really great. And it was the first time I'd worked on a film where they were able to come to set, because it wasn't a film that had a guy wearing a human skin on his face, with a chainsaw over his head, or whatever, knives on his hands. So it was great. It was great to open that world up, and my kids started to realize that, especially my daughter. And after the film was done and we saw it, she said, "Dad, I get it now. I get it why you have to be away, because you get to work on these movies. And I understand now. Before I didn't understand. But because she was there and saw the process and saw us building, and got to come to New Zealand for 4 months and would come to set every day and watch and know everybody and see it, and then see it finished, and she was young, just very perceptive young lady. And it was great. And at that point, I felt much better about my obligations to the film industry, and because it does, you sacrifice a lot. We work crazy hours, first in, last out, and you don't see your family that much, and they understood. But it was great, and they benefited from it, and they loved it. But yeah, I love working with VFX, because then we can come up with things that we haven't seen before. Like, I just keep calling it a magic trick. It's like, look, we just got to keep coming up with magic tricks and fooling the audience, So, if something's practical, all 100% practical, that's cool, but maybe that isn't the best way to go. Vice versa with VFX, but the combination works.
The hybrid, when a creature is from the waist up practical and from the waist down digital, it just shows how it's a false choice having to choose between the two.
It is. And even now we'll build creatures, and just to save time and money, and it'll work better, we just say, hey, listen, VFX, you guys do the eye blinks and eye movement, and we'll do everything else. Or, if you guys want to do the lip sync, because there's times, like on the third Narnia film, Dawn Treader, we rebuilt all these Minotaurs, and they were beautiful, and we had lip sync on them. But during post, the dialogue changed so that it didn't match. And they went ahead and did digital faces, and it worked fine. I wasn't upset by it by any means. I was like, this is seamless. They did a seamless job. So it all worked out great. So yeah, I don't get upset about it anymore. Like, oh, they replaced. I get more upset about when we all work on stuff and it gets cut out, because then that really pisses me off, because that's the director's doing, and I'm like, why'd you cut that out? Look, all of us work so hard on it. It's like, oh, it just the timing. I'm like, you could have cut this and this out. I don't care about that stuff. You should have left that stuff in. So, but it's a great, I mean, everything about filmmaking is collaborative. I mean, I collaborate with the costume department, with, you know, the hair department, with every aspect of the film industry. You know, we all work together for one common goal, which is to make a really cool film and to, you know, be able to bring the director's vision.
Yeah, I loved your quotes about how what you learned from Stan Winston, that your department's not a vendor, you're a collaborator, and that you're there to save the production money, save them time, as opposed to wasting their time and spending their money. And it was just such a great shot in the arm hearing these tales from the trenches from you, Stan, from all these luminaries that are in the book, about just your philosophy and attitude towards your art, towards your craft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's great. I learned a lot of lessons. I listened and watched a lot when I was working for like Rick Baker and Kevin Yeager and Stan Winston and John Buechler and Alan Apone. So I was really, really lucky to work in all different levels of shops and do different things. You know, I didn't start as a sculptor. I actually never ever sculpted, I think, at many of the shops. I was mostly a lab guy, but I loved it. I loved making molds and running foam and, you know, doing whatever was asked of me. I was there to do the job. So whatever Kevin Yeager needed me to do, I did. You know, whatever Stan needed me to do, I did. So, you know, it's fun. I keep on Facebook, or on Instagram rather, Stan Winston's school keeps posting all these old photos, and I catch myself in them all the time. Like there's the one of, and I remember like it was yesterday, the mock-up Queen Alien. We've seen that video of, it's like a paper mache wrapped in plastic bags and all, and I was standing right there, and I was watching it the other day, and I was like, oh, there I am. Oh, there I am. You know, and
that
I just
bin
remember
bag alien, the bin bag alien.
Yeah,
that
we
is
were all,
like one of my favorite Stan Winston.
Yeah, we were all,
videos.
yeah,
It's
we were all,
amazing.
yeah, we were all in the back of the shop and putting that together and seeing it was a proof of concept, you know, and Stan always involved everybody. And every day we had a morning meeting and he would fill us in on what was going on and what he expected of everybody. And, you know, he was a great boss to work with and work, you know, I learned a lot from Stan, you know, I mean, he was great. So, but I took a lot of that and applied it to my career and applied it to K&B Effects, and it's worked out great, you know, because K&B is going on its 35th year. Greg Nicotero and myself, and there's a reason.
Yeah, people like zombies.
Yeah, well, there's zombies, you know, that was the last 11 years. So, but prior to Walking Dead, there was so much stuff, you know, and it has been so much stuff. So it's nice.
Well, Marshall, as you were
I've got to say, I
book...
remember when Howard was, when we started writing, when we started doing the interviews, I said to Howard, you know, I have a good idea about how everything works, but, you know, I've never done, you know, the makeup stuff myself. And, you know, is there anything that I should read? Is there some research that I should do before, you know, we kind of work on this book together? And he said, no, you don't have to read anything. You're going to learn everything just from, you know, talking to all these amazing people. And he was right. You know, anything that I needed to know, I just learned from listening to them. And that's what we tried to impart in the book, you know, although it's a collection of stories. It's not okay, this is what happened in 1901, then, you know, 10 years later, then 20 years later. And it's not a history like that. And it's not an instructional piece, but it does, in its own amazing non-linear way, going back and forth for different people's stories and, you know, their origin stories, to their favorite blood makeup effects, to character makeup effects, to old age. You know, I think it builds up this amazing picture of the industry.
Also, Marshall, you've created these family trees, which for me were fascinating, because you can see how one artist will then have a protege who has yet another protege who has yet another protege. So as you were compiling all this information, was there any particular lineage or family tree that where you could trace, say, Howard's work back to Rick Baker or Stan Winston, back to Dick Smith, and so on and so forth? Were there any family trees that started to emerge in your mind where, like, oh my God, you can trace from like 1912 up to the present day, this one family tree?
Well, for sure, you can see how when Dick Smith decided to sort of buck the trend about keeping everything to yourself, where, you know, around Dick Smith's generation, everybody just had to figure it out for themselves, right, Howard? Nobody really shared that information. Everybody would start from zero. You know, Howard talks about when he started, they would look at Famous Monsters magazine and they would see the occasional pictures of these amazing makeup guys in their shops, and they would, you know, get out a magnifying glass and see if they, you know, what materials were they using in the background. And, you know, I mean, literally they were piecing it together like detectives. And then suddenly Dick Smith decides, well, you know, he's going to make himself available and he'll talk to anybody who reaches out to him. He'll make time for anybody. He'll critique their work. If anybody wants to know, how do you make a wrinkle? You know, how do you do this? How do you do that? He will tell them. He will just reveal all. And Howard's generation, that's how they came up with that openness, with, you know, with that sort of generosity. And then the next generation that we interviewed, people who Howard brought on board, and Kevin Yeager, and you know, the people of Howard's generation, and we spoke to, you know, the younger guys, and they all talk about Howard in the same way that Howard talks about people like Dick Smith. They would say, I turned up to KMB with my portfolio, and, you know, it's like they were just, you know, young kids. They didn't know what they were doing. They turned up unannounced. They said, you know, can we just speak to someone? And then, you know, Howard would come out and talk to them for an hour and give them, look at their stuff, give them a tour, and it blew their minds and it set them on this path. And so you totally see this lineage about how, you know, you've got you know, Dick Smith inspired by you know, Pierce and the people who came before him, and then him deciding to share and inspiring a whole generation of people, and then how, you know, Howard's generation have completely paid it forward, and how the people who are up and coming today, you know, amazing artists, many of which that we spoke to, talk about, you know, Howard and you know, some other people of his generation in the same sort of loving and grateful terms. So you totally see how, you know, one generation, you know, kind of helps another, and that's amazing. You think so many jobs, people are like, you know, I don't want those young ones, whippersnappers coming up, snapping at my heels. You know, I don't want to get to be 50, 55, 60, and then have these, you know, 20-year-old kids, you know, kind of taking over my work and stuff. Whereas, you know,
fiercely competitive.
Howard is, yeah, there's enough work to go around if you're really talented. And Howard's excited to see what these people are coming up with. He's not like worried. He's not like, oh, I don't want to encourage these people in case they take a job away from me. He's like, I can't wait to see what they come up with. And it's like, it seems to be an incredibly nurturing side of an industry that often isn't very nurturing.
Yeah.
And I find it's like the nicest, most positive, you know, good vibe sort of part of Hollywood and filmmaking, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, beats working at an agency. Well, Howard, let's talk a little bit about your current work. And very kindly, in your book, Seth MacFarlane wrote the afterword. And for people who've been following my YouTube channel or my podcast, they know in recent years one of my favorite ongoing shows is the Orville. So I'd love to hear just some tales from the trenches from you about the overlap or the intersection where the writer and the creator and the makeup artist and the performer, where they all come together when you're creating a character like Dan the engineer, you're creating a character like Bortus. What's the ebb and flow? What's the give and take? Kind of where are the jobs just, are they all blurring together as you're trying to create these characters from scratch? But I would just love to hear about the Orville, because the show for me keeps evolving and growing and getting better and better. And right now it's really firing on all cylinders. So.
It really is. This season 3, Seth took it in a different direction. And I think it found its niche.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. When I got a call, because I had worked with Seth and his producer, Jason Clark, on Ted 2. I was the makeup department head, and we ended up doing this big Comic-Con scene and did a bunch of stuff, and it was fun. Anyhow, I was working on Transformers, one of the Transformers movies, and I got a call from Jason Clark saying, hey, Seth is going to do this TV show, and it's a sci-fi comedy, and there's a ton of stuff we have to figure out. Are you available and interested? And I said 100%, because I really enjoyed working with Seth. And they sent me like the first 2 scripts, and I read them, and I'm like, wow, there's some good stuff. And things were described. Bortus was a totally different character. He was like made of lava. He was like a lava rock monster. So yeah, so we kept developing and talking, and we did tons and tons of artwork. John Wheaton and Mike Broom at K&B were just pumping stuff out. And something I learned about Seth was that he reacts better to thumbnail drawings, like just little quick sketches, opposed to like doing a finished Photoshop piece. We would do that later, but we would, like, Mike Broom would sit down and do like 20 drawings on a piece of paper. And then I'd show Seth, and he'd like go, yeah, these are great, because he comes from the world of animation. So he doesn't want it to be too committal at that point, and he could pick out stuff he liked. Anyhow, we went down a lot of different roads to figure out what was going to be what. Bortus was the hardest one, to tell you the truth. He was really difficult. Once they cast Peter Macon, who is magnificent, by the way, and who I love to no end, it started to come to life. And, once we got his head cast and all, and we had multiple people taking stabs at the sculptures. Norman Cabrera was super instrumental in getting it to a point, but it was still, there was something not clicking with Seth. And I ended up just saying, screw it. And I went down to Seth's office with a head cast of Peter and clay and my sculpting tools. And we started sculpting together. And I kept blocking it out, and then he'd go right and then come back like in an hour and go, okay, maybe this and this nose. So I sculpted half the head, and he's like, that's it. That's Bortus. And I was like, okay, great. So I brought it back to the shop, and I gave it to Garrett Immel, who's one of our other great artists. And Garrett finished it, and Garrett ended up handling, I call him King of the Mocklins. And he ended up doing all the Mocklins, and he applied Peter for the first 2 seasons. And Tammy Lane applied Bortus on the last, on season 3, once we took over. Yeah, I mean, that was a tough one. So, but anyhow, we kept developing, and I knew what Seth's sensibilities are. I understood his language, and I knew he loved Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I said, okay, so we're not going to do like big, crazy Guardians of the Galaxy things where it's very colorful and it's filled with this or that. We're gonna play it low. We're gonna do earth tones. We're gonna kind of follow the lead of Mike Westmore, who did all the makeups for that. So we designed a bunch of things. And I remember a testing day came up. It was right before Thanksgiving. And so I made up a bunch of people. I made my wife up as a Krill. She was the very first female Krill. And that makeup was sculpted on her head cast. She's a champ. Miriam is a champ. And she let me do the whole thing, contact lenses, dentures. So the film test we made a bunch of aliens, and Jon Favreau directed the pilot. So Favreau and Seth came to set, and I lined everybody up, and Seth just went, okay, I'm confused. So is this, like, I can have this, like, what, a few of these every month or every show? I said, no, this is where we're at. This is what we're looking at for the entire show. Every single day? I said, every single day, things will be at this quality. And he's like, Howard, I just imagine like we'd have a forehead or a nose or something on somebody like Star Trek. I'm like, no, we're not doing that.
No, we're going Dan the Engineer.
Well, Dan the Engineer was created during that test accidentally. So I work with a guy named Dirk Rogers, who's a great performer, really comedic. And he's in Orville quite a lot in different makeups. But at that test, I did a Dan the Engineer. It was slightly different coloring, but it was, and not that I ever had Dan the Engineer, but Seth really loved it. And he's like, I got to write a character around that. And then I redid that makeup for the pilot when they go to the planet and there's an alien that is sitting there like the doctor or whatever. And, that was the first genesis of Dan. And then when Seth said, I'm going to have Mike Henry play this, and I'm like, okay, that'll be funny. And we did Mike up, and he was magnificent. All the guys were great, everybody in it, but I mean, it was such a great collaboration. And Seth is unlike anybody else. He had all the scripts written. He had all the episodes done before we ever started shooting. I have friends on American Horror Story, and they're like, we're supposed to shoot episode 8 tomorrow, but there's no script. And I'm like, that sounds like a lot of aggravation and unnecessary frustration. Seth had everything plotted out, the entire thing, and he was always working on the scripts, making them better. I felt like the first season still was trying to get its legs. I had the best time. It was super, super hard. We all worked so hard. We were doing like 90-hour weeks for months and months and months. I mean, I was fried at the end of the show, but I felt like we really succeeded. I had a great team. I got to hire tons and tons of makeup artists from my union, from Local 706, and work with friends. And it was just a great experience. And it was all on studio lot over at 20th Century Fox. And then season 2 came about, new stuff. We raised the level even more, redefined things. And then when season 3 came out, we were unavailable the beginning of the show. I wasn't able to do it. I was on something else. And so I recommended another effects company, Autonomous, which is run by a good friend of mine, Jason Collins, who started at K&B. And he's super talented, great guy. So he started working on it. And because this season was they shot it in a block, which means that they shot a little bit of every episode, like every day. So I can't necessarily say, oh yeah, Jason was on episode 1 to 3. There's slatherings through every episode of work Jason did in the period he was there. We came in and we took over the show March 2019, literally like 2 weeks, or 2020, literally like 2 weeks before COVID hit and shut everything down. And then we didn't start up again until November, right after Thanksgiving. But it was great. I mean, we got to redevelop Topa on Imani, who plays Topa this year, and she is amazing, like one of the most amazing people I've ever worked with. Patient. We had to design 2 different makeups. Todd McIntosh applied her makeup every day, but she was able to create 2 different characters, the male Topa and the female Topa. And never a wimp, never anything, never a whimper, nothing. I was just so awestruck by her. And then we had a lot of guest stars, Bruce Boxleitner is in the show, plays the president, which Jason Collins designed that makeup and did a great job. And then we applied it a couple more times. But yeah, it was a great show. So I love I love where Seth has taken it. And now I keep hearing, like, from Star Trek fans, like, yeah, I wish Star Trek was as good as Orville.
It's not even close.
Really, yeah, people love Orville and they're loving it. And Seth really went the distance on the visual effects, and the VFX department is amazing. And they really
seeing the ship emerging from a nebula all to the tune of Dolly Parton. I was like, I didn't know I needed this in my life, but now that it's here, like, this is made my entire year, just waves of chills, that whole sequence.
It is. It's great. And Seth loves this. That's the thing. He's a super smart guy. He loves science. He knows what he loves. He's a funny guy, but he's really invested in storytelling, and there's one script that we didn't get to shoot, which I really, really loved, but I saw that he wrote it as a book. And it's a novel of, I think it's a short novel. I think you can get on Audible as well. But it's that script turned into book form, and I just love that script. It was it was really hardcore stuff. It was really, I don't want to give it away, but I was like, we're not making this. Oh my! It's like, we can't. We're out of time. This show has to get on the air, because we could have kept shooting and shooting and shooting. But the world of Orville is amazing, and excuse me, and the ships, the sets. Stephen Lineweaver was the production designer. That ship was the most incredible thing ever built, and every day I walked on the set of Orville, my head was spinning, because it was just a beautiful set. All the sets were gorgeous, and you really believe, and when I would give tours and I'd bring people into the ship, their jaws dropped, because they'd never seen anything like that before. It really was a magical place. And that set stood for years and years while we were shooting. And then I went to the studio and they tore it down. They were tearing it down, and I kept going like every couple of weeks and taking photos of it till now it's an empty stage. And I'm like, wow, I hate that.
End of an era. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and who knows? I mean, Seth is on to other things, as he should be. He's a super creative guy, but I don't know. In the back of my head, I have a little hope that maybe we'll revisit Orville someday.
Yeah, a giant feature film maybe in 5 years, or hopefully
whatever he wants.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, anything set in that world. Well, as we start to run out of time, just as a way of kind of wrapping things up,
Sure.
I just wanted to first thank you for the many nightmares you gave me as a kid. There were some movies you worked on, things like Troll and Creepshow 2 and Invaders from Mars, all of which kept me up at an age where probably I was a little embarrassed because I thought I was a battle-hardened, horror fan as a young kid, but you were still getting to me at that time. But you mentioned how you had very nurturing parents who nurtured your interest in this craft. And I guess a question for both of you, just kind of making the pitch for the value of being a horror obsessed kid or a monster obsessed kid. Like, you can't become the next Marshall Julius or the next Howard Berger without these early experiences where you really get almost traumatized, like James McAvoy watching The Exorcist. So just thank you for all the incredible experiences you've given me just as a movie fan on things like Predator or Aliens, whatever the case may be, or more lately, things like the Orville. But Marshall, just as a way of bringing things to a close, what advice do you have for parents out there who recognize maybe their kids becoming a horror junkie? What is the value of horror? What is the value of horror in your life, in particular, the types of movies that Howard Berger has worked on throughout his career?
I think that all of that stuff is imagination and enthusiasm and just full-blooded grabbing life by the horns sort of gusto. These are movies about just go for it, do it. If you're passionate about something, I don't think as a parent you should ever sort of squash your kids' enthusiasm, whether you get it or not. So long as they're not, shooting up drugs or shooting people in the streets, then you should just encourage it, really, shouldn't you? I mean, it's the thing, you're not going to go off and become, hopefully, like a psychopath or, just because you like horror movies. God, the first book I ever wrote was about action films. And it came out the same day as a report on this mass shooting in England, which really did not help the sales of my book, I have to say. And there were people saying, action movies, people watch action movies and they go off and they become, killers. And it's like, that is just such unbelievable nonsense. And it's like, I think if anybody didn't encourage their children because they thought that it's going to lead to sort of, devil worship or anything negative, then they just don't get it. I was lucky that my mum was a fan. As far as I'm concerned, she was a nerd before the term existed. She collected movie books in the 1940s. She went to the cinema every week, 2 times a week, as often as she could. And so I grew up with her enthusiasm, and the last thing she was ever going to do would be to kind of squash it down or to say, oh, that's weird, or I'm worried that you like that sort of stuff, or, all of that seems to be, crazy. And I've paid that forward to my children. If they're interested in something, if they're enthusiastic about something, I think you have to encourage it, because having enthusiasm for things is just, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest thing. Being excited about things, caring about things, wanting to have a go, whether you're a fan or a filmmaker, whatever it is that, it leads you to be. I think enthusiasm is everything. So whether you're into monsters or action movies or or period dramas or rom-coms or whatever it is, if you're really into it, it's like, you just go for it. And if your parents don't encourage you, then just go and get some parents that do.
Yeah, I mean, Howard, what I found so inspiring is, I can't remember if it was in the book or one of the videos, how you would put in a full day at the studio and then go home and keep making monsters. And I almost feel like that should be the title of the book, just keep making monsters. But I just can't thank you enough for all your contributions to film and television. Any final words about the book or your collaboration with Marshall Julius before we bring this conversation in for a safe landing?
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I couldn't imagine writing this with anybody else. Marshall's perfect person, and he's just always thinking about it. He's still thinking about it. We talk constantly. We probably talk every single day. But no, it was a great adventure. And I didn't realize how hard it was to write a book. You know, it's hard enough to write a book, and then it's really hard to get a publisher. And then it's really hard to, every aspect was difficult, but it was very rewarding. And I hope people love the book. You know, I'm, like Marshall said, it'll be published. It'll be released on September 13th in the United States, and then I think a couple days later in the UK.
The 15th, I think, in
going to be,
England.
they're doing a number of translated versions of the book. So I'm excited to see my name in Swahili, and no, I don't think it'll be Swahili. And then, and then, like Marshall had pointed out, there's going to be some signing opportunities. Like he said, Dark Delicacy, which is in Burbank, California, on Hollywood Way, on September 18th from 3 to 5. And then the following weekend at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures off of Fairfax, which is an amazing museum anyhow, we'll be signing there on the 24th from 1 to 3. And both signings will have contributors. The biggest amount of contributors will be at Dark Delicacy because there's that space we can use. At the museum, it's a little more confined, so we had to corral our hopes. But it's going to be great. I'm really proud of the book. People seem to dig it, who've seen a little bit of preview. I didn't show my wife anything for 2 years. And then I printed the book out, and showed it, let her just look at it, and she thought it was magnificent. And she is a harsh critic. She'll tell me, like, yeah, it was good, but the design sense wasn't great, or she thought it was really, really wonderful. So that meant a lot to me. And my kids haven't seen it yet, so I'm excited to show them. But we really appreciate, your support, letting us be on your show and talk about what we do and what we love and talk about the book.
The honor was mine. Yeah, getting to meet the two of you has been a pleasure and a privilege. And I just can't thank you enough for carving out some time to promote the book on this show. And if I can help you move some units, then mission accomplished. So once again, we hope y'all have enjoyed this conversation. All the information for pre-ordering the book will be included in the description below. But once again, go back and check out some of Howard Berger's films. You'll be blown away. We're talking some of the best genre films of the 80s, some of the biggest shows in history like Walking Dead, and filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino. It's just, go to the IMDb page. Like I said, your jaw will hit the floor. But once again, hope you've enjoyed the episode. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.